Two large yellow letters IN with blue broken up letters spelling visible underneath make up the logo Invisible.
The following is the full interview with Jessica recorded during the filming of the documentary Invisible in April 2022, funded by the British Academy. Directed by Dr. Anica Zeyen and Wadeby. Interview conducted by Dr. Anica Zeyen. The writing disappears and we meet Jessica. Jessica is a black woman with short hair and glasses who sits in her living room.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I'm 29 and I live in London. I have dyspraxia and dyscalculia, which means that, well, dyspraxia is a motor coordination impairment, and it also has an impact on me in that I find it very difficult to navigate, tell the time. It can be very literal. It's slightly similar to autism, maybe in the same family of neurodiversity, but with an extra spiciness of me not being able to find my way when I'm lost, which is fun.
How did you find out about your neurodiversity diagnosis?
Well, I always knew that there was something wrong with me. Like as a small child, I was told off a lot for not being able to do things other kids found easy. I couldn't tie my laces, I couldn't tell the time till I was 14. I was very messy, very clumsy, always getting into accidents. And my parents recognized that I wasn't being defiant. It wasn't a sort of behavior issue. I was really trying and I really, really couldn't do it. So I was in the weird position of being, by the time I was in high school, in the gifted and talented set for English and in the remedial set for maths. Like being deputy head girl for my behavior, but maybe not getting the GCSEs I needed to even hold down a job. And it was just a mystery. Like no one knew why I couldn't understand or couldn't cope with things, and I couldn't understand myself either. And that was very painful, I think. No, I know it was very painful and humiliating, and it was hard to have this mismatch between what I wanted to do, or like what I was capable of, and then finding a little thing like not being able to find my way to a building stopping me altogether. Like for example, I wanted to study at York University, and I missed the train for the open day. I just got really badly lost, couldn't find the right platform, and I stood there on the platform crying because I knew I was going to get the grades to study English, but I couldn't get there. So anyway, I got older and I didn't get into York. Neither physically nor academically, so that's fine. Anyway, got older, I just assumed that I was not very bright or just not very capable, and it really impacted my confidence. And I met my wife, Hannah, who's a speech and language therapist, and she went on 2 dates with me and she was like, "You have dyspraxia, I think." And I looked into it, and it meant the world to me to finally be able to understand myself, why I struggled at the things I struggled with, why I was good at the things I was good at. Like it's very hard to describe how scary it is to not be able to use your own mind very well, and being able to, reconcile myself to myself made a huge difference, like a huge positive difference to my life.
How do others react to your diagnosis?
Most people have no idea what I'm talking about. They're like, "This what now?" I say dyspraxia is like dyslexia of the body, and people are like, "Oh, okay." I mean, that's not quite what it is, but it's a good shorthand. My employers are always like, "Oh yeah, that's fine," and I'm sure they're like quietly Googling what that is, because it's important to be seen to be diverse. They try really hard. people nowadays do try really hard. My parents were not. My parents were surprised that I even wanted to get diagnosed. Like, they tried really hard to protect me from negative scrutiny. And they didn't, I think they had that slightly old-fashioned idea that having learning difficulties or learning differences was a bad thing. And they didn't want me to have that label, even though I really needed it. And my dad, when I asked him the questions that the assessor needed to know, like were there any developmental delays, were there any signs that young Jessica was struggling, he would sort of say, yes, well, Jessica did struggle, but she's really, really happy. Yeah, it took her a long time to do this, but she was such a sweet child. And in the end, I was like, you don't have to say but, you can say and. You know, I could be like the happy, chubby little baby and struggle with things. And I can be, you know, the creative, silly young woman that you love and struggle with other things as well. You can put them together. And I think he's starting to get that. But he was just protective of me, you know.
What can people do to make your life easier?
I think having the implicit made explicit in conversation is really important to me. Like if you say, oh, I'm going to be doing this thing, I will assume that you're literally going to be doing that thing at that time. And I can get really confused and upset when that's not true. And I'm coming to understand now that there are two different kinds of truth. You know, like people use metaphors, or people sometimes will say something that's not quite true because they feel nervous, or because they're not sure, or because they don't want to be open with you. And that's not lying, it's just like a layer of safety. That's how I think of it, as like a safety blanket, a verbal safety blanket. But sometimes I do need people to be really straight with me. That's helpful. Give me time to get lost. Understand that I can't really follow directions, and allow me to take notes and check back with you what I've understood. Like for me, I can see what I can see around me and hear what I can hear around me, but I don't have a map in my head of the world. Like I don't understand where things are in relation to other things. And I don't have a calendar in my mind. Like it amazes me that people have calendars in their minds. Like they can flick back through time like that. Like to me, it's more like the chapters of a story, or like going from stepping stone to stepping stone narratively. It's like you will have a superpower. Mind blown when I realized that people had images of the area around them and then a pinpoint where they were, and then they navigated in their minds to where they wanted to go, and then they did that with their bodies. That's amazing. And I can't do that. So please give me time to get lost. Yeah, and also I get fairly overwhelmed with sensory stuff. So a really, really jarring sound might shut me down completely, or a really unpleasant, too strong smell. So if I say, I need to just take a break in a quiet room for a bit, just believe me and give me 5 minutes and I'll be able to reset. And actually all of those things are useful for neurotypical people as well. I think putting those into practice in your life would probably be useful to anyone, not just oddballs like me.
What have you learned from your disability?
So I always know when food is about to be ready. When I'm cooking in the kitchen, even if I'm sitting here in the living room and the kitchen is 2 doors away, I'll be like, those pumpkin seeds are ready now, because I have a really good sense of smell. I can remember lyrics and the plots of movies that I haven't seen since I was 5. I'm very tuned in to sort of facial expressions and feelings, which is something that not everyone is, apparently. And I think more than anything else, it's taught me patience and compassion. This is such an English nerd thing to say, but the etymology of it is like to suffer with. And so if you've experienced what it is to not be believed, to be belittled, to be humiliated in public, to be looked down on by your peers and your teachers, that can be really good material for you to use to practice compassion for others. And I don't think I'd be the person I am. I don't think I'd have the same capacity for kindness, or it would be harder for me to find a way to that kindness had I not experienced the painful things I've experienced. It's not easy to convert pain into wisdom, and you have to have the right resources, and I have been lucky enough to be able to do that a bit.
What does your average day look like?
Average day, I wake up, I think I should exercise, I go back to sleep. I wake up again, I grab my lunch out of the fridge, I say goodbye to my wife, hop on the train, go to the library where I work, I help customers, I stack shelves, I try and learn more about the Dewey Decimal System, which is surprisingly problematic. Apparently Dewey wasn't a very nice man. Chat with my colleagues, then lunch comes along and I need to be alone because I will have been being social and masking all my tics and pretending to be neurotypical for a couple of hours, and I get tired. So I go somewhere quiet, I sit on my own, I put my headphones in and decompress. And then it's back to work, which I love, by the way. It's a really quiet environment and I love the smell of books. And lots of my colleagues are also neurodiverse. It's just, the library is where you find the cool kids, in my very biased opinion. But come visit us. Anyway, the commute is always a nightmare, even a good one. I'll come home and I will be kind of in pain from sensory overload. Like, if you could imagine having to do a really difficult puzzle at a rock concert full of rotten cheese, if you could imagine like how overwhelmed you'd be feeling, that's how I feel on the tube. And that's amazing when I am cooking ratatouille. I need to know when the onions are perfectly cooked. But when it's just BO and people staring at you, it's really overwhelming. So I come home and sometimes I'll just need to not talk and not make eye contact and go upstairs and lie on the floor in a dark room. And my wife's really understanding about that. One thing I do to help me unwind is listening to an audiobook while I cook, because that's all my favourite sensations. Like, people talk a lot about negative sensations of neurodiversity, but I don't know if other people get as much out of a ripe tomato as I do, necessarily. Like, this deep sort of ivy green smell of the stalk and like the perfect sheen of its skin, and then the sweetness when you just like, it's not all bad. Yeah.
What was your experience of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, I first heard about it from a relative who was really worried, and this was Christmas time, I think. He said something about a virus which could potentially be really dangerous, and I took it very literally, and I thought, it's going to be like the one in just between the two world wars, and I guess we are overdue a pandemic, and that's great. And then I stopped thinking about it, but I believed him, and it was plausible, and we were at the time due another global pandemic. So I just thought that was another thing I'd have to deal with. I think my wife experienced a lot of denial, like, oh, this couldn't happen. But I looked at the facts and it seemed plausible, and so I accepted it. And I already had my little Brexit covered, just in case that went badly, of like, tins and pasta and stuff. So I was like, it'll serve us well no matter what. And then when it hit, I was like, yeah, this is really, really, really bad. This is awful. It's going to be a lot like the Spanish flu, but worse, because we travel so much further, so much faster. And again, a lot of my loved ones were experiencing denial and I couldn't understand it. I mean, grief I could understand, terror, hopelessness, but it was true, and so there was nothing else to argue about, except maybe what brand of beans we want to stock up on. Yeah, I remember the moment when I knew there was no way around it and no way back. It was that speech of Boris Johnson, and me and my wife and our housemate sat on the sofa holding hands, and I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to live in history. I really wasn't aware of myself as being... People are going to study this for their GCSEs one day, and I'm living through it. Great. I think a lot of neurodivergent people operate at a fairly high level of stress and have to hide their anxiety, and it's exhausting. And I don't know that many people will have had to learn systematically the kind of coping mechanisms I need to get through an ordinary day. And that's a really sharp learning curve. You don't want to learn how to swim when you've been chucked into the water. So I really felt for people who are experiencing deep anxiety for the first time in their lives, in the middle of one of the objectively most scary things anyone's had to face. Yeah, that was really hard to witness. Like, I was very anxious as well, and I'd had lots of counselling and various kinds of occupational therapy, and it's awful watching people suffer and not being able to help them, really. So yeah, that was that. And also I think dyspraxia meant that I was very fond of being indoors. And I was already really into D&D. I already loved reading. I already loved embroidery. So I already had lots of hobbies ready to go. Yeah. But I know that the people I loved really suffered from that lack of company, and it was hard to watch them go through that. Well, I was working in an archive at the time, and apparently archives are essential. So we had to go into work every day.
Anica's guide dog sleep barks in the background.
No worries. If you want to just take it from archives are essential.
Okay.
I knew she was going to make trouble.
That's alright. That's okay. We need a little bit of lightheartedness.
I think she's dreaming. Oh, she's chewing her tail. Silly girl. Okay. Yeah, archives are essential, apparently. So I had to commute into work every day on the tube, which was upsetting. And I felt it wasn't fair or true. And it was another one of those situations where people saying what they didn't mean made me feel really scared and frustrated. Like, the head of the museum I worked at was like, "We really value you, but I'm going to put you in harm's way. We're really proud of the work you're doing, but we're not going to give you the tools you need to do them." And I found that deeply distressing in a way that my colleagues found surprising. Because they're like, well, of course he doesn't mean what he says. Of course we're just expendable. Of course he'd rather see us dead at his feet than lose a penny. I couldn't get my head around it. But in terms of day-to-day stuff, it's the commute, people taking off their mask to cough and then putting it back on again. I would go to the building, say hello to the security guard, work alone, have my lunch alone, work alone again, go home, and then see my wife. And I think for the first time in my life, I felt under-socialized. Like, even for me, this wasn't enough. Like, nowhere near enough socializing. I couldn't even hear people around me in the building I was in. Like, I couldn't smell people around me. There was no mess that wasn't my mess. It made me feel like I was insane. Well, I should say it affected my mental health negatively. And I remember a colleague of mine left a Post-it note on my locker, and I kept it on the fridge for weeks. because it was the first person I'd spoken to, even via post-it note, who wasn't in my household, and it meant a lot to me. People spreading misinformation really bothered me, and this is where being very literal-minded was both a blessing and a curse, because I was in a family group chat and someone posted this video of just a guy standing in front of a green screen saying, "This was made in a lab in China." And this relative of mine posted that video, and I said, you putting that video in this chat for your relatives to read puts their lives in danger. If they believe you, and as a result of your advice, choose not to take the measures they need to take to stay safe, and then they get sick and they die, their blood's on your hands. And my dad was like, "Whoa, Jessica, you can't say that." I was like, it's the truth. Unlike that video. And I encouraged him to get some media literacy and left the group. And another meme that got shared around by someone I really love and respect, who's like an educated, bright, warm, friendly adult, was, if you drink tea, it will kill the virus. And I said, we don't drink tea at boiling point. And to boil something takes a while to sterilize it. So why do you think that having not boiling water in your throat for a short amount of time would sterilize your throat? Do you think it's possible to sterilize flesh? Like, why are you saying those things? And that was also apparently rude. Oh, by the way, I didn't actually say that to her. I said it to my wife, and Hannah was like, "Don't say that out loud." Like, that's one of the inside your head truths. And I was like, but it's true, isn't it, Lassie?
Hannah and Jess playing the piano and cooking lunch together.
Yeah, sorry. Things that people did that were helpful.
Yeah, or positive.
Yeah, it was cool seeing people finally taking working from home seriously. I've always believed that there is so much work that can and should be done at home, and I'm so glad that the world's caught up. The joys of not commuting and not having to have face-to-face time in the office unless you actually need it. Hopefully this is the beginning of the end of presenteeism, hopefully. And it was really wonderful to see my friends who had the resources to picking up old hobbies, seeing my dad get back into baking and cooking properly, seeing my wife Hannah get more into walking again. That was a real joy to witness. It made me really happy. And I got into D&D, and I got to connect to people from all around the world. And it was because of the pandemic, I think, that people were willing to try things they'd never tried before. And yeah, that was really lovely. Embroidery. I love baking already, but I started really getting into baking. Not banana bread. That kind of passed me by, sadly. Into reading and into dealing with my mental health issues, which is an odd hobby. But I was sitting still in the quiet for hours and hours and hours on end. And all of a sudden, all the stuff that I keep busy to avoid thinking about started bubbling up to the surface. Like, what are you doing with your life, Jessica? Are you the person you want to be? And normally at that point, I would go and do something to distract myself. But no, I had to sit down and really think about whether or not I was living the life I wanted to live. And if I died at the end of the month, would I be satisfied with what I've done? And so I cut off toxic family members, moved house, got engaged, and started looking for a new job. So yes, thank you for the peace and quiet. I did not enjoy it. I felt like it was like pickling me, but being forced to sit still was kind of what I needed.
What do you think were the challenges for people with dyspraxia?
Right, the dyspraxia community. How did we cope with I don't know, we can't find each other. I'm joking. Obviously, we have forums online. One of my favorite dyspraxia jokes is like, dyspraxia high five.
The hands go past each other.
But yeah, as a group, without generalizing too much, we do tend to be somewhat underemployed, and growing up in a not very friendly environment where perhaps your skills aren't recognized is really hard on your mental health. So even if you're lucky in the way that I was, and you have had counselling, and you do have some tools at your disposal to deal with that, it's hard to cope. It's still hard to cope. And if you haven't been as lucky as me, it would have been incredibly painful, I think, if you're already very low and very fragile and very vulnerable, to have to go through this maybe on your own. And a lot of dyspraxic people who their skills are so uneven that the workplace hasn't really figured out what to do with them. And I think that they might be more vulnerable to losing their jobs if they were precariously employed or underemployed than the average person.
Do you think the pandemic has changed the way people think about disability?
No. I think people have paid lip service to it, and I don't think, maybe I'm being cynical, but the fact that at the beginning of the pandemic, people were saying, with no sense of shame, that it's just affecting old people and disabled people, so it doesn't matter. Yeah. And that people are saying now, well, it's only like really vulnerable people who are at risk now, and we need to get on with our lives. You need to get on with your lives without me, without your grandparents. How would you feel if someone said they need to get on with their life, therefore they don't care if your life ends? Maybe I'm being pessimistic, but I don't think anything's changed. I don't think that the pressure has made people more negative towards disabled people. I think we're just seeing people showing their true colours now.
What changes do we need to make the world more disability inclusive?
I think we need to stop valuing people by how much money they can make. I think that disabled people are in some ways more difficult for people to extract labour from. Some people say that we're less exploitable, which is a nice way to think about it. But I think we need to value human beings for being human beings. We need to value them in and of themselves. That would be great for all sorts of things. That would be great in the fight against sexism and racism and disability rights. It's all woven together.
Do you think other parts of your identity impacted your experience of the pandemic?
Well, I'm bi, which is fun. Sorry, no, it is nice. It's nice to be able to appreciate most of the people I meet. Yeah, I wonder how much do people miss because they're straight. Like, I remember being a teenager and a group of people walking down the road, and obviously being a teenager, I was very alive to physical beauty, to put it politely, and I was just like blown away by how gorgeous everybody was. So that's yeah, sorry, you weren't asking about my many crushes, you were asking about the pandemic, so let me focus. One thing that took me by surprise was people making comparisons to the HIV epidemic, not in scale, but in the attitude towards the people who were dying, until everyone realized that it could happen to anyone. Like that specific kind of, oh, well, it's this group who we do not value, who we believe to be at risk, so fine. And then a couple of months later, they realize it's actually something that can affect anyone, and all of a sudden it matters. And it was weird to see history repeating itself like that. And I think that queer people, again, are more vulnerable to mental health issues, more likely to be underemployed, more likely to be unsafely housed. And I wonder what it would have been like to be in the closet and living with your parents during the pandemic. I wonder what it would have been like to have to move home if home wasn't safe. I got married during the pandemic in a really little ceremony, and my grandparents wouldn't come to the wedding because they are homophobes. They think that being bisexual, as I am, is not my fault, but I'm making some bad choices. And you guys have seen Hannah. She's an excellent choice to make and love of my life. And I think it was partly the stress of the pandemic and being very aware that I don't know how long I have to live, that made me think, I'm not putting up with this from you. And I cut them off, basically. It was a catalyst for a lot of personal change. And being Black, there was a lot of distrust, I think, in the Afro-Caribbean community towards vaccines and medical interventions in general. And I think that makes a lot of sense if you think about it from the perspective of a group of people who have not been treated well by doctors historically. I know that a lot of the people I love have had really awful experiences, racist experiences, from the NHS, which I love, and I feel like I cannot criticize it. But at the same time, I can't deny that, Black women are more likely to die in labour, or, Black pregnant folk are more likely to die in labour, more likely to experience infant mortality, more likely to have this and this and this and this and this. And I think that when things got really scary, it makes sense that people didn't want anyone around them that they didn't feel safe around. And for people of colour, that can definitely include doctors. And I found myself in the weird position of having to try and convince people I loved to get this life-saving vaccine, but completely understanding why it terrified them to get involved with the medical establishment unless they absolutely had to. So, yeah.
What worries you about the future?
I'm really disturbed by how maybe it isn't the pandemic's fault, but how the difference between the different realities we're living in has seemed to be widening. Like, some people fundamentally, apparently, don't believe that the world is round. And there are people who no longer believe in viruses. And I imagine that those fault lines are probably already there, and I just wasn't paying attention. But now that people have sort of revealed themselves and been under pressure to reveal themselves, and they've been in this crucible, finding out that some of your loved ones don't think that disabled lives matter is really painful. And finding out that some of your loved ones who you respected don't know what a virus is and don't want to do the research is also very disturbing. And I think I've also taken some stances that, in terms of like insisting on being treated well as a queer woman and insisting that people put their money where their mouth is when it comes to Black Lives Matter, I've taken some stances that have made me unpopular in my family. Not the entire family, just the ones who I've cut off for being homophobes. Lines have been drawn, things have been said, and I don't know what, if anything, is going to bring us all together again. I don't have the sense that we're living in a shared reality. I don't have the sense that people on the other side of a political divide still see me as human. And that scares me.
What excites you about the future?
Barbecues. My dad throws this big barbecue every summer, and it's all jerk chicken and plantain, and my auntie Cora makes these mountains of fluffy white rice. And I always ask her, what's your secret? And she's like, oh, it's just a bit of this and that, love. It's just a bit of this and that. And I'm like, tell me. That's going to be great. I I do like being around other people, even though I find it so stressful. Like, it's worth it. It's worth it. And I'm looking forward to being able to hold people and cuddle them and just spend hours together somewhere cozy with a hot chocolate and not be afraid of contaminating them with my breath. I'm looking forward to board game nights, looking forward to Kaylee's. I'm looking forward to snuggling my nephew, who is 9 months old, and teething and beautiful. I'm looking forward to weddings, and I'm looking forward to sort of being in the park because I want to be, not because there's nowhere else to go.
Which changes from the pandemic would you like to keep?
Working from home, an awareness of personal hygiene, an awareness of working conditions needing to improve. I hope people hold on to the knowledge of the fact that most employers really don't care whether you live or die, and that the one thing a company absolutely has to do is make money. And everything else is secondary, including your continued survival. Remember that. No matter how friendly they are, no matter how many pizzas they buy you, no matter how warm and rounded their font is or how shiny their website is, they will not protect you if it means they lose money. Like, never, ever forget that. And hopefully, if you can, move jobs, and if you can't, stay where you are. And just hold that knowledge in your heart, because it will protect you from poisonous bullshit. Am I allowed to swear? Sorry.
What would you wish for?
I would wish to have what I need to build a loving, warm, happy home. And I'd wish for good luck and happiness at the beginning of me building this family, integrating 2 families that I'm a part of. I've been married for 6 months now, and it's been the best 6 months of my life. So yeah, a home that people are happy to spend time in, a marriage that brings strength to both me and my partner and the people around us. If I could express that in one word, I would, but that's what I'm wishing for. I would direct that wish at the non-disabled world, and I would wish for them to be set free from the idea that you can value people according to the money they make or according to their ability to meet really arbitrary targets. I'd wish for people to value themselves a little more highly than that. And that ability to love and cherish people for who they are and not for what they can make, and cherish what people actually do rather than what you were hoping they were going to do, will set everyone free, I think.
What made you come forward for this documentary?
I thought, I wonder how many Black queer women are going to be doing this. And I remember when I was a kid, I couldn't imagine at all what it would look like for me to be loved, because there were no main characters in books or movies who looked at all like me. I couldn't imagine what a marriage between 2 women would be like, and I did want that. I couldn't imagine an image of myself as an adult with all of the challenges I have being happy at all. And that was a huge part of my depression, like looking into the future and just seeing nothing. Thinking that I was only ever going to be a burden, that I could never bring anything good into the world, that this world was not made for me and I wasn't really meant to be here, and that everybody I loved was apparently happy to buy into that system, right up until the moment where I told them how unhappy it made me. So I wanted to do this because I hope that anyone who's wondering if they're alone feels less alone. And I hope that I don't know how to describe it. Like, I think if I'd been able to see or feel a part of a community and see really or experience really what a possible future was like, I would have felt more able to dream for a future of myself. So I hope I can help that happen.
Credits rolling. Dr. Anica, Zeyen, co-director, narrator, and interviewer. Jessica, interviewee. Wadey B, co-director. The British Academy funded this project. Copyright 2023. Dr. Anica, Zeyen. All rights reserved.